Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Handling Maintenance Stress Monday, Regulating Stress in Times of Crisis. It is being presented by the National Apartment Association's Mental Health Subcommittee. My name is James Campbell, and I'm the Senior Manager of Industry Relations with NAA. I want to welcome all of our members in attendance. Thank you for joining us for this important topic. Before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping points. First, this presentation is being recorded and will be posted to our website and YouTube channel next week. You may then share this presentation with those colleagues and friends who are unable to attend at present. Second, we have allotted time at the end for live questions and answers. You may type your questions into the Q&A or chat boxes on your screen, and we will share them with our presenters. Now, I am very pleased to introduce our moderator. As I bring this slide up, there we go. John Sons is Director of Training and Marketing Strategies for Burlington Capital Properties, with 35 years experience in rental housing. He serves on the NAA Program Administration and Curriculum Committee, as well as Chair for NAA's Mental Health Subcommittee. John also has served on the Board of Directors for the Greater Nashville Apartment Association. He is an NAA Lyceum graduate and member of the NAA faculty. Welcome, John.
James, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for your work on putting on the seminar today, this webinar. And I also want to thank NAA for covering this important topic on behalf of our maintenance colleagues throughout the multifamily industry. As chair of the subcommittee, I'm just super excited to be able to focus on our maintenance teams today. Today, we'll be organizing our webinar into three parts. First, we're going to be hosting, it's going to be an introductory discussion. It's going to be just a conversation with two senior practitioners who both know as much as anyone about the stresses of our maintenance teams and what they deal with on almost a daily basis, sometimes an hourly basis. And second, we'll be featuring a presentation from the National Council on Mental Wellbeing on how best to manage all of these workplace stresses. This is actually going to be our first webinar with the National Council, and we're super excited about that. And third, we will open it up to your questions. As a matter of fact, before we get started, if you have questions at any point as we move along, go ahead and put those in the chat feature or the Q&A feature. We're going to be monitoring those, and at the end, we're going to be taking on those questions, reading any comments that you have. So please feel free to put those in there. And also, we've all agreed that should we run over time just a little bit, we'll stay as long as we need to answer any questions. So with that, I'm pleased to present our three presenters today. I'm going to introduce Paul Rhodes. He's the Director of Maintenance Operations for the Life Properties LLC and is a leading spokesperson for maintenance topics and teams. I'm sure most of you out there have heard of Paul. He brings over 27 years of experience in the rental housing industry. Until the pandemic, Paul traveled the country providing instruction on all aspects of property maintenance and spoke at events for national associations, regional affiliates, and property management companies. Paul was actually just at TAA last week. He continues to be a strong evangelist for the multifamily maintenance trade and for the growth of this amazing industry. So thanks for being here, Paul. Next, we have Chris Caramanica. He's the Director of Facilities at Wind Companies, where he oversees maintenance operations for a portfolio of over 7,500 Northeast apartments. Previously, he held senior level maintenance operations and facility positions at Avalon Bay Communities. I hope I get this right. No, I'm not going to get that right. Chris, jump in and tell me the name of that company.
Jujamson Theaters.
There we go. I knew I was going to screw that up. And Blue Man Productions, which I found to be very interesting. I did not know that about Chris. Comprising 24 years of experience overall. Chris graduated from Ithaca College and is very active in his local community. And next we have Elizabeth. We will call her Lisa today. Sometimes she goes by Lisa, so we may call her Elizabeth or Lisa as we go through the day. Guroff. She's a consultant with the National Council for Mental Wellbeing. She brings over 25 years of experience in the mental health and substance use services field. Before joining the National Council, Lisa was COO of a large mental health provider in Montgomery County, Maryland, where she directed implementation of trauma-informed care practices across the entire agency. And I want to add too, she actually also worked with the maintenance team there as she did that work. Lisa graduated from the College of Worcester and the University of Connecticut. So welcome to you all. We're thrilled to have you with us today. We appreciate you taking the time to be here. So we're going to get started. We're going to start with Paul and Chris. We want to just have a conversation real quick about some of the things that are going on in the multifamily field as it relates to our folks on site. And I'm just going to ask some questions. So if you're ready, Paul, I'm going to start with you. And I'm going to ask you, what can a leader do, if anything, to prevent overstress in a time of crisis?
Thanks, John, and thank you again for asking me to be a part. I'm humbled to be included in the conversation. And I think the first step to really getting leaders that can do something is think about it in terms of preventive maintenance. You know, preventive maintenance, one of the best things we can do for our properties and our communities is to fix things before they break. And in my life and properties and communities I've been on, I tend to think in that same way. What we can do to prevent overstress in times of crisis or just stress, the heightened level of stress, is to help prevent it by really fostering a connection before the stress happens. I mean, apartment maintenance, it is a stressful environment. It's going to stress. No matter what we do, the pandemic's going to happen, the weather's going to happen, supply chain issues, parts are out of stock, the pipe's going to break, the toilet clogs at 2 o'clock in the morning. That all is going to happen. But as leaders, what we can do to help prevent the overstress is have a relationship with those on our teams around us, the people closest with us, so that in those times of stress, not only do you know how you're going to react, but you have a sense of how others are going to react as well.
You know, I love you referred to it as preventative maintenance. And I think you and Chris both will agree. We all know we're supposed to do preventative maintenance, right, on all of our assets that we manage.
Sure.
But sometimes we're a little guilty of not doing it as often or as habitually as we should. And if we don't, we pay the price for that. So I love the way you tied. I love the way you tied that in, Paul. And Chris, so same question to you. What can leaders do to help prevent that overstress in times of crisis?
Well, thank you again, John. I'll sound what Paul said. Thank you for inviting me today. It's great that we are talking about this topic, especially with everything that's been going on the last 2 years. Paul said it best, really, when he said preventative maintenance. A lot of times, not just in our work lives, but in our personal lives, we forget about the preventative maintenance of the mind and the self. We're so focused on the assets. What leaders can really do is take that moment to talk to their maintenance team members, ask how they're doing. I frequently have my leaders ask me, what can I do for you? Because we are in a service industry, maintenance personnel and our operations partners, it's all we do is service people all day long, but we need service too. And our leaders is really what can help us be successful, is asking, how are you? Is there something I can do to make your life easier? Is there somebody I can call? Do you need a day off? Do you need to leave a half hour early today? Recognizing those stressors that we have and making it a little bit easier on our team members is really what leaders can do to prevent that stressful time.
So leaders are they're in an action position. You don't just sit back and lead, you have to actively lead. And if I'm hearing you both correctly, that's part of how you prevent some of that overstress, is being an active leader. So let me ask you, I'll go back to you again, Paul, if I can. How can we as leaders reinforce the needs for our team members to handle stress constructively?
Really and truly, it comes down to that. In my opinion, it comes down to that connection piece. I mean, I'm working with the people on my team, depending on your property size, it could be as close in as, if you're the maintenance supervisor, it'll be as your maintenance technician, your community manager, your leasing people, assistant manager, all of those people very, very close to you. It's important that we foster a relationship beyond, here's the work order, go do the work, come back to me when you get another one. Here, your job every day from 8 to 9 is task A, 9 to 10 is task B, 10 to 10:30 is task C. Don't forget about your break. See you tomorrow. It's important that we see each other as people. You know, you mentioned the fact, and Chris mentioned the fact that we're working with these people all day long, and it's a good thing to intentionally notice something outside of the task at hand today. I have a coworker at where I'm at now that I noticed that she was on her computer from early in the morning when I'm up to way late at night. And, you know, I'm getting emails from her at 1 a.m., 2 a.m. And the next day I called her and I said, hey, I noticed you're there a lot and you're saying you're behind. What can I do to help so you can go spend time with your kids, or so you can do that? And the only way that I knew that was critical for her was I knew something about her life outside of the job. I knew her as a person in addition to a coworker. As leaders, we've got to intentionally model that behavior.
Chris?
Yeah, along those lines, you know, one of the things that I kind of teach my team members, and I've been for over 20 years, is I never check up on anybody. I check in with them. You know, it's something that I say all the time, and I think that we get so used to checking the box, you know, having that laundry list of things that need to get done, whether it's work orders or unit turns or cleanliness of the grounds, or that VP is coming to visit. We need to make sure that everything is perfect. But I really try to check in with my team. I try to get my direct reports to check in with their team. How's everything going? What can we do to help? And it goes such a long way. On the other side, when I worked at the site level, when you have that level of relationship that Paul is talking about with your team members, whether it's your operations team members or your other maintenance team members, you know, what happens is that you pick up those little things like Paul was talking about, sending the emails a little late, or, just maybe taking a little bit longer to, get a piece of work done that you would normally do quite quickly. But when you build that relationship, you're also developing a shorthand and this mutual respect between, your team and your team members, that when it hits the fan, we all know what it is. When it hits the fan, the stress is diminished because you have that shorthand. You don't have to you don't have to pull up your emergency action plan and go through it line by line. You know what your job is, what your partner's job is, whether it's a leasing agent or, a property manager. But that comes after you've built that personal, after you've built that personal interaction, that shorthand. When crisis comes, there's no freakouts, nobody's yelling and screaming, because you know that there's a job and you could just tick away at those things that have to get done.
Listening to you both speak, and part of the question was, how can we as leaders reinforce these needs? I think it's incumbent upon us as leaders to build strong teams that network with each other and build those relationships. And that's basically what both of you were saying and what you said. Again, it's an active part of leadership, right? Leadership is not just sitting in a chair with a title or a nameplate across from you that gives that title. It's an active part of being a leader. Well, let's move on to, I've got one other question before we turn things over to Lisa. What's the best way that y'all can think of that leaders, or really anybody, let's just open it up to anybody in the apartment industry, what's the best way to communicate about the workload and stress?
No,
Chris, go ahead.
Don't let Paul go first. We'll never finish.
Okay.
No, it's what we're doing today. It's talking about it. I know you're not supposed to use the word and the definition. You ask the question, what can we do to communicate? Well, the answer is communicate. And it really is as simple as that. I find that my maintenance team members are most stressful. I have the most issues with my maintenance team members that they bring to me directly is when they're not communicating. And that communication is a two-way street. Whenever I go to an event, I talk to, an old friend or an old coworker, and they go, "Oh, you never call me." And I hold up my phone and I go, these things actually work both ways. I might not call you, but you can call me. So I think that it's identifying and having that proactive communication it could be very short and sweet, and I think that we forget to do that a lot. I think we also forget, especially in times of stress, to acknowledge that we're going through a stressful situation. Hey, listen, there was a fire this weekend. Nobody slept. We have 4 turns, and we know that we got 2 more notices for at the end of the week. Just saying it out loud reduces the level of stress because everybody knows you're on the same page.
Paul?
Yeah, I'll take that and agree wholeheartedly with it. There's a famous quote from the amazing sage Mike Tyson that says, "Everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth." And that's kind of, I think, where we're going here, to where the way that we do anything is it starts with a plan, but that plan has to have a bedrock or a foundation. In this case, the foundation or bedrock has to be that, like what Chris said, two-way communication. There has to be an openness and a vulnerability of both parties, to where if I as a leader say, or we're going to do something, and then whomever it is I'm leading goes to respond back to me and I don't give them a chance to respond, I have not fostered the relationship before the proverbial punching in the mouth happens, so that when the crisis, when the stress occurs, they're not sure how I'm going to react. I dictated how I expected it to react, but everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth. I need to know my team needs to know me, that we all together are working on the same direction and on the same path. So it does kind of go back to that preventive piece of fostering those relationships, fostering that communication when there's not the crisis, so that when the crisis occurs, we've got a shorthand to talk through. That really is the best thing I think we as leaders can do, and not only say it, but model it as well.
John, I just want to quickly note that, Paul and I are not using titles. We're using leaders, because everybody is a leader. Whether you are, no matter what your title is, you're a senior executive vice president with over 50 years of experience, or you're first-time part-time porter picking up trash on a site. Everybody is a leader, and it's what you choose to be. So you have the ability to have this communication. You have this ability to have stress in your job, whether you've been here 50 years or you've been here 5 minutes. And we're very cognizant of that. And that's why we want to say leaders, and we're not identifying job roles and job positions, because everybody is a leader.
Everybody can lead. And, we've talked about building those teams. We've talked about communicating with the teams. You've also talked about supporting those teams, right? And supporting each other. And then again, before we turn things over to Lisa real quick, in preparing for today's presentations, we talked earlier, and a couple of things we talked about. One was checking in with each other. Chris, I think that may have been you check in with each other instead of checking up on each other. If you're constantly checking in, that's a strong sign of leadership. And again, that's not a sole position. That can be a leasing agent checking in with a groundskeeper, just checking in with each other. How are you doing? Supporting each other. And then we also talked about, real quickly, we talked about empathic listening, being able to listen with understanding. I always call it empathetic listening because that's really what it is. listening when you are communicating. And one of the things that we wanted to focus on with the mental health subcommittee over the last year and a half is we wanted to make the conversation comfortable. And that was one of our focal points, and will continue to be our focal point as we move forward. So being able to make the conversation comfortable, you have to be able to discuss things, but you also have to be able to listen with understanding. Would y'all agree with that?
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, Paul and Chris, I really want to thank you for your insight. I knew that y'all would bring just great insight to what our folks go through at the site level, those maintenance teams, especially, but it's the entire team on site, because our office team really needs to be in support of our maintenance team, and the maintenance team, we're weaved together. And I'm sure there's probably a lot of you out there nodding your heads like we are. If you see Paul and Chris, our body language is nodding our heads. So as we move through the program, the webinar, remember, if you have any questions or comments for any of us on here as we move through this, and as I turn this over to Lisa, please use the chat box or the Q&A function within the webinar, and we're going to monitor those and get to those at the end of Lisa's presentation. So now I'm just super excited to turn our presentation over to Lisa, who will share clinical best practices on how you can help regulate the many stresses that Paul and Chris have described. So Lisa, it's all yours.
Thank you. Yeah, I couldn't be teed up better. So, what we're going to really be talking about today is understanding just how as humans we function, and then using that understanding to respond in a way so we can really bring out the best of ourselves during a time of crisis. So, when stress occurs, when something doesn't go right, I have just this, picture for you on the next slide of the, let's go past that. Sorry. This is just a reminder that when we talk about hard stuff, it can be triggering or difficult to hear. So please make sure to take care of yourself as we go through today's session. But, when something happens, all information that comes into our brain comes in the lowest part of our brain. And the first question our brain asks is like, am I even safe here? And if I'm not, all information stops. I go into fight, flight, or freeze, and my brain just shuts down. The only thing my brain focuses on during survival mode is actually my heart rate, my body temperature, and my blood pressure. No cognitive, like higher level thinking or processing. It's get safe from the bear attack, right? And just survive that. But there are a lot of things that actually trigger that for us. So if you think of, on this next slide, right, we're driving into work and we get a flat tire. Half of the people on this webinar are probably going to be like, that's it, I'm done. I can handle nothing else today. It's too overwhelming, and they go home. The other half of the people on the webinar will fix the tire, go into work, and you'll never hear about it because it's not the actual event, but it's what it does for us. And for some people, that flat tire is an overwhelming event that's traumatizing, that's a crisis. And for other people, it's not. So you have to be really careful about ever defining a crisis for anyone else. But when a crisis occurs, you'll see on the next couple slides, just things that normally happen to us because we're human. We get emotional, our thought patterns are affected, we can have physical symptoms of stress, our personal relationships can be affected. But even, this whole list on this next slide about, the physical stuff that happens, and, whether it's we get headaches or emotional, or maybe we try and numb that pain off, by use of substances, or we might, decrease our immune system. Because remember, the minute the crisis occurs, or I perceive a crisis, brain stops functioning, I go into fight, flight, or freeze. And the truth is this affects and overwhelms our entire capacity to function. So it affects, as you can see on this next slide, our whole self, our whole body, physically, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, because we're human. That's just how we respond when we go into a crisis. For people who are visual, I have this next slide where, when a trauma occurs or a crisis occurs, something bad happens, and I go into fight, flight, or freeze, and some of us will default to fight, some of us default to flight, some of us default to freeze. We kind of have one that we go to more often. But when that happens, I go into my sympathetic nervous system, fight, flight, or freeze. Ideally, we have a pause, a break, the trauma, the crisis is over, and my system comes back down to rest and digest, or parasympathetic. Another way to think about this is if you're ever driving down the road and you hit a deer and the deer survives, you'll see the deer fall over and look dead. In fact, many comedy movies have made fun of this. The deer looks dead. If you stay around long enough, you'll see the deer get up and convulse and then run off into the distance. That's the deer discharging that trauma. And so for people who are visual, this next slide is our parasympathetic, so our rest and digest, hopefully where you are right now, kind of that calm, soothing space. And this next slide is kind of our fight, flight, or freeze, right? So if we go onto the next slide, you'll see we go back right into a crisis or trauma occurs. We get keyed up, our brain shuts down. We go into fight, flight, or freeze. We discharge that trauma. We go into rest and digest. For people who are visual, you can see it on this next slide as well. Unfortunately, on this next slide, when we can't discharge that trauma in a healthy way, our nervous system, instead of going in that red line, actually starts to do the black line. Now, if you look at the parallel lines, those really indicate emotions I can tolerate. And what you can see is when something happens, an ongoing stressor, a toxic stress, something that doesn't go away. In fact, what happens is my nervous system never goes back to resting. And I either get stuck in on or off. For those of us who might go into flight, into fight, we see that hyperactivity, panic, road rage, right? The coffee isn't hot enough. And all of a sudden they're exploding and very upset and very angry, right? Or people get stuck in off. This depression, disconnection, deadness, exhaustion, burnout. What I will tell you is to be mindful as humans that we are going through a very toxic stress experience right now, this international pandemic. So if you feel yourself responding differently than you did 2 or 3 years ago to the same thing, it might be because you aren't getting those pauses, those mindfulness breaks to allow your system to go back to rest and digest. But if something's going on an ongoing crisis basis, we actually emotionally re-regulate and we're permanently on or off, and it can look like this in this next slide. And this is true for the other amazing humans that we work with. It's a human response to toxic stress, to being completely overwhelmed or burned out. But there are things we can do, and that's what we want to talk about. So to hopefully get out of this or not be in this space, one of the things we can do is build our own resilience and protective factors. On this next slide, I'll give you just that definition that resilience is that ability, right, for us to cope. Things like emotional regulation and being optimistic about our future, seeing ourselves as being able to resolve problems, not hopeless, why even bother trying? I'm going to mess it up again, so I'm not even going to do it, right? So the importance of connection, we thrive as humans in connection, and we really diminish and really actually start to die away, unfortunately, in disconnection. We actually know that if someone is experiencing extreme loneliness and disconnection from other humans, the physical impact can be like they're smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So it really gets into our core and our soul. Another way that we talk about this is protective factors, and I have a list for you here on the next slide. So our environment, stable and supportive relationships, safe and stable housing, what you all provide, right? Response from first responders, but also getting a good night's sleep and eating nutritious foods. But I always say to supervisors and to leaders, right? We need to be the healthy relationships for our staff, because it's in that that we can heal. Traumas occur in relationship and they can heal. We heal in relationship. So really important what you were hearing, Paul and Chris talk about, that human connection. We are all human first, and that's where we thrive in healthy connections. So you can see on this next slide, though, is if I'm in fight, flight, or freeze all the time, and all of my body is worrying about is blood pressure, heart rate, and body temperature, then I don't get, access, things going on in my liver or my kidneys or my lungs or my extremities. And that's where we start to see ongoing significant medical problems as a result of sitting in crisis for too long. The other thing that we see on this next slide is that when crisis occurs, because it goes through that lowest part of our brain before I even have words to explain it, I can be triggered into remembering a previous trauma or crisis because of a sight, a sound, a smell, a touch, a taste. I might not even know what I'm reacting to. I just know I don't feel safe. And when I don't feel safe, all that information stops in the lowest part of my brain. So if I'm only accessing, the lowest part, that fight, flight, or freeze, there's no productive thinking, abstract thought, constructive thought going on in my brain at all, because it's not even getting there to be able to do it. So we need to recognize as humans, sometimes it's the crisis in the moment that triggers me, but it also could be something I'm not even aware of. So when we start to see those fight, flight, or freeze responses in people, we're going to talk today about what I can do so that in crisis, we can all access highest thinking parts of our brain and come out of that crisis better than we went in, and following the plans, those standard operating procedures, they kind of go out the window when a crisis occurs, because my brain can't even go, oh yeah, right, I have a standard operating procedure. I just become really, really reactive. So as you can see from this next slide, the elephant in the room is that crisis or trauma and our response to that can look like a lot of different things. And so if we understand how the brain works and how we can intervene to bring out the best in all those amazing humans we come into contact with every day, right, we can do something profoundly different in all of our relationships. Because the truth is, unfortunately, crisis begets more crisis. Trauma begets more trauma. As you can see on this next slide, it really can become this vicious loop. Because when I'm in fight, flight, or freeze dealing with a crisis, I don't think past the impact of what I'm doing. And so I might put myself into another crisis situation because I haven't thought through all of the different impacts of maybe an action I might take next. And that's what we're hoping to prevent, is that when we get into crisis, to be able to return to that rest and digest place so I can access highest thinking parts of my brain. Because the brain is amazing. It does a million different things at once. But I have for you kind of a simple way of looking at how we process it. So let's skip past this one. I have a picture. This comes from Dr. Bruce Perry, who's a neuropsychologist, does amazing work on people who've been traumatized, children who have experienced trauma, and getting back to our full, genuine, authentic self where we can really be the best of ourselves. But as you can see here, this simple idea of the brain is that all that information comes up through the lowest part of our brain, that brain stem. If it stops there because we're in crisis, because I say I'm not safe, nothing else happens. Anything past blood pressure, my brain isn't going to focus on it, because that's just how our human brains work. As we move up this continuum in our brain, actually, the first question is, am I safe? The second question is, am I connected to anyone? Do I belong anywhere? Does anyone care about me? The third question then is, what can I learn? But I have to feel safe and I have to be connected to another amazing human being to even access the highest thinking parts of my brain. So as we can see on this next slide, if we're in a healthy development and we're really in a calm, cool place, that survival part of our brain doesn't take a lot of energy. Information processes through it. I go into emotionally regulating, being calm, and then moving to the highest thinking parts of my brain. But you can see where it says developmental trauma, you could also just put crisis in there. That when I'm in that place, most of my energy, just as a human, is keeping me safe in that moment. And so most of the brain functioning for any of us is in that survival mode. So I have a slide for you to remember just that, am I safe? On this next slide, as we move up the brain, right? Am I safe? Am I loved? Am I connected? Do I matter? And that's where, as humans, when we connect with each other and make people feel safe and like they matter. You were hearing, Paul and Chris talk about connecting with people as a whole human. That's why this is so important, because then when it hits the fan, as they said, I can quickly go in and help someone feel safe, connected, and then we can start to go, how are we going to creatively get out of this situation and fix it? But if I can't hit that top part of my brain because I'm stuck feeling disconnected and unsafe, we're just going to continue to perpetuate that crisis. This next slide was game-changing for me as a supervisor and as a parent, as a partner. The way that I read this, and this also comes from Dr. Bruce Perry's work, is the first part up here, internal state is calm. And look at what happens to sense of time. So I'm calm, my extended sense of future, right? I can say, you know what? If I say this thing to my partner, a month from now, he's going to really like me. Or a month from now, he's not going to like me. Or if I do this thing in a year from now, it will really help my career, right? Or I don't want to do this thing because it won't help my career. But that's only when I'm calm in the highest thinking parts of my brain. Look at what happens when I add just one more column here. When I go from calm to alert, all of a sudden my sense of time goes from extended future to just days and hours. So I'm not thinking a week from now, a month from now, a year from now. I'm like, right now, how is this going to impact me? But look at what happens as we add more. So the next one is alarm. And now I only have hours or minutes. My brain can't process past what's going to happen. So if we're in a crisis and we want this, or let's go to standard operating procedures and let's follow this, and because we want a long-term solution, not just, a Band-Aid on it or, the duct tape but really something, a permanent solution to that crisis in a way that's going to be helpful. If I'm past calm, I'm not going to be able to remember that we have a standard operating procedure. That's why we go through drills and different types of things so that we can stay calm in that moment and default to those processes. But look at what happens when I move from just alarm to fear. I've now gone from hours or minutes to minutes and seconds. Any amazing human that you're interacting with who's anywhere half past alert, the only thing we can do is help them to emotionally regulate. Telling them to just calm down won't work. It might be nice if it did. It's never worked. But we'll talk about what we can do to emotionally regulate, because look at what happens on the last one. When I'm in sheer terror, I have absolutely no sense of time. And this will be when people say, I don't remember what happened, right? Because they're totally disconnected from their brain and just reactive. So as we move back up that chart to the left, we go to helping someone emotionally regulate, which we're going to talk about, to connecting with them, back up to that calm sense, right? Because that's where the magic can happen. But there's nothing I can do if someone's emotionally dysregulated, half past alert, except help them emotionally regulate in a supportive way. So I have one other thing just to help us kind of also think about this is on this next slide, we can even see age-wise, if it helps to think about that. See what I'm at, just from calm, I go from kind of an adult to alarm. I'm in that child toddler space, right? Where I'm just emotionally reactive. It happens to all of us, right? It's just a human thing. Here's the other thing I want to remind you about. You as an adult can never calm anyone if you're not calm first. So if you're past calm, if you're past alert, you need to know what emotionally regulates you first, how you connect with other people, because if not, I need you to tap out. Let someone else who's in calm respond to that situation and then come back when you're calm. And there's no shame in that. We're all human. And I promise I'm not always calm either, but we have to recognize it. Because as Dr. Perry reminds us on this next slide, a calm adult can help regulate any dysregulated, amazing other human. But a dysregulated adult will never calm anyone. So we as leaders and supervisors need to be responsible as humans, as partners, as parents, to, as coworkers. Find out where you are first in that crisis. Stay, when you can get emotionally regulated, then you can step in to help others regulate so we can all access the highest thinking part of our brain to really connect. So what I have for you on these next slides are just some ways in which we can do that. Because when we are in survival mode, we don't have the ability to respond, learn, or process. And as the next slide shows, Dr. Perry really gives us these 6 R's, doing things that are rhythmic, repetitive, relational, connection, relevant or age appropriate, respectful at all times, and rewarding, things we can enjoy doing. So things like on this next slide that can activate the lower brain, music, drum circles. I don't know if any of you have, for me, I can put on a song and scream it out, right? And just get that emotion out in a way that can help me come back to emotional regulation. But playing instruments can be soothing. Sometimes the music that we have around us, or things like movement on this next slide, even rocking chairs. If anyone's gone through before the pandemic, the Charlotte airport, they're lined with white rocking chairs because they can calm anxious travelers really well. So finding things like knitting or physical movement, or even on this next one, touch, a frozen lemon, just being able to squeeze that. We never want to touch anyone without permission, but we know we can. You can see also finger painting or petting animals. All of these things actually hit those 6 R's and can help us emotionally regulate. And then these next 2 slides are just kind of a reminder of that adult bringing another amazing human down. As we can see on this next one, if I'm not emotionally regulated, we're off to the races together. The other thing I wanted to just highlight was something they had mentioned in the first part of our conversation about empathy. And I have a really brief video here for you from Brene Brown on the importance of empathy and empathic connection over sympathy.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So yeah, trying to paraphrase Brene Brown's, better to just hear directly from her. But that importance of just, I hope you're hearing that human connection and recognizing that it's not up to me to decide if it's a crisis for anyone else or a trauma or a bad thing or a good thing. It's up to them. So when someone tells you they've been traumatized or it's a crisis, believe them and respond appropriately. I've given you some other skills here that you can do in terms of helping ground people. On this next slide, anywhere from, holding a stuffed animal or that cool, frozen can or lemon, music, just doing things that help us just ground in the here and now. The next slide is just what we call square breathing. So it's, breathing in for a count of 4 and holding that breath for 4 counts and exhaling it for 4. And then, holding again, and just doing that a couple times actually loosens that lowest part of our brain into moving into, can I connect with someone? I have other ones here for you. This was from a group that we worked with at a school, and just the importance of interactions, connections, and being present. And it doesn't mean that we don't have high standards for people. We actually need to, because people will always rise to that, but we have to let them know what we expect from them. The last thing I just wanted to highlight is the work that we do is hard. And so on this next slide, right, that we can't be present without it really taking a toll on us. It's hard to show up and be compassionate and connected with others because we all have our own stuff going on. A reminder on this next slide that there are different ways in which compassion fatigue or burnout starts to look like, whether it's witnessing someone else go through something traumatic and the impact that it has on us, whether it's, just exhausted from showing up every day and giving the most of ourselves without replenishing ourselves. Because the truth is, as you can see on this other slide, next slide, is we just really want to be in this compassion, satisfaction, compassion, resilience, where we can show up and be present, because that's what our maintenance teams are doing every day. They're not just fixing a door, they're making someone feel safe. They're not just fixing a leak, right? They're meeting the basic needs of people in a really compassionate, amazing way every single day. And we need to show up and be present for them as well, because if we don't, they're going to move into compassion fatigue and burnout. And this is what it can kind of look like. some of the warning signs that I myself might be headed into a burnout place, or those that we supervise or lead or your maintenance staff are on this next slide. Whether we see people starting to think the worst in every situation, reacting disproportionately, or not taking a vacation, forgetting why they even come to work, decrease in job performance, or not getting enough sleep regularly, can even come out in our families with increased arguments or decrease in our social life. And then I have for you kind of the burnout curve that people start to move on this next slide. Really from just hard work, low rewards, to not feeling like there's an end in sight, to starting to really, experience rage towards others, this physical exhaustion, mental cynicism, and eventually collapse. And we don't want people to get there. So it's really important, like we show in this next slide, that we take care of ourselves, exercise, sleep, mindfulness, giving ourselves that pause to get out of fight, flight, or freeze, right into higher thinking parts of our brain and functioning, and eating well, and that human connection. We are humans. We thrive in relationship and we struggle in disconnection. And so one of the things that we really want to ask is on this next slide about, when we feel most alive, what are we doing and who's surrounding us? It is very rare that someone says at work, that's like my best, full, genuine, authentic self. But there are amazing things we do every day with our families and other humans and in nature. And it's through that we come alive. And when we recognize, as Paul and Chris were saying earlier, that whole person who shows up to work, then they can start to bring their full, genuine, authentic self to work. And that's where we thrive. When we are recognized for being just who we are, and that's enough, we can do amazing things. So I just implore you at the end of the day to recognize all of our own humanity as we go through this. Next slide. Recognize that what we are seeing is everyone doing their best to survive, yourselves included. Frequently, what we're observing are actually misplaced coping mechanisms. It worked someplace else, but it's not working in this situation. And please recognize that since we are all part of the problem, we can absolutely all be part of the solution. So I want to thank you. I know that the next two presentations that you'll hear from my colleagues are actually going to build off of some of this work. And keep doing the amazing things that you do and that your staff do every day.
Lisa, thank you so much. That was, there were so many interesting things. I know we met before we did this webinar today, and this was just truly inspirational. There was a lot of stuff. It's educational, gave us a lot of different perspectives and how to look at and into perhaps the people that are around us all the time. So before we part ways, and again, we're here to answer questions. I see some questions and comments coming in the Q&A block and in the chat feature. So let's start answering some questions here. And one is how can staff state a need for a break without pushback from others, especially admin or boss? Any idea? Anybody? I'm just going to throw this to all three of you, Lisa, Paul, Chris.
My answer is somehow. And that basically is based on kind of what we were talking about and what Lisa reinforced, of having a relationship with your coworkers that if I need a moment or I need a time, however I can, as ugly or not professional as it gets, I need to have the relationship with my coworkers for that grace of, I need a minute, I got to go, like what Lisa was saying, I need to go play that song that I can yell and scream to in my car on the backside of the property with no judgment. Like, I'll be back. And just somehow, I don't think there needs to be a formula or a way to do it. Just do.
Yeah. I think acknowledging the fact that you need it, and knowing what your audience is too. So your admin or boss that you're worried about giving you pushback are they data driven? Is it as simple as saying, listen, we've completed 50 work orders, or is it, you know what, my spirit hurts today and I need a break? There's two different types of people out there. That there's data driven, and then there are people that are very emotional and empathic, and knowing the best way to present your case, if you will. But yeah, somehow is I agree with Paul.
And I would just add that all humans need breaks, and like schedule, like that should be part of our culture with anyone. That if we haven't learned anything in this pandemic, we have definitely learned, if I am not at my best, I can't be present for anyone else. Mm-hmm. And so, I have been encouraging supervisors and leaders throughout this, reevaluate your scheduling and your budgets. Because if you don't have a schedule that a human can function in, then you're never going to do well. Mm-hmm. And we back to back people in a very unrealistic way. And so as leaders, making sure that you're mindful that all humans need breaks, and that how is that part of just your practice throughout the day is really going to be important. And that's when we say to those amazing humans you've hired that we're connected and we care about you, right? It's not just about doing a job, because if you treat people like they're just doing a job, all you're going to get are check boxes. And we're not going to get good work. Or, we were talking earlier, the amount of information and knowledge your frontline staff have that is invaluable to the functioning of your organization. You will never get any of that if you continue to treat people like, they're just checking off boxes for you.
This next question, I'm excited to read this next question, and I want y'all to listen up. I think you're going to find this to be a very interesting question. It actually plays to the second point that the mental health subcommittee wanted to focus on when we were first formed. The question is, how do you balance customer service and mental health? And as the three of you think about your response to that, our second point with the mental health subcommittee was that intertwining, if you will, of residents' mental health along with the on-site team's mental health. But let's take that just a step further, if you don't mind, because this is a great question. How do you balance customer service and mental health? Customer service isn't always the on-site personnel to the resident. Sometimes that customer service is a supervisor to an employee, or a corporate office team member to an on-site team member. So I think, first of all, you can define customer service in several different ways. But at the end of the day, how do you balance that customer service and mental health? Lisa, do you want to take that on first?
Sure. If your staff don't have mental health or mental well-being, they'll never provide good customer service. Simple as that. It can't be an if this, one or the other. Because if we don't take care of our staff cannot take care of our customers. So they have to both be important.
Yeah, just to echo on that, I'm not sure that the answer is an either or proposition. It's the same. Customer service is good mental health. Good mental health is customer service. It kind of goes back to the golden rule. You treat other people the way that you want to be treated. And that doesn't matter if they're customers that are paying us rent or customers that we're providing a service for, meaning if I'm the grounds technician and my maintenance supervisor asks me to do something, I'm doing a service for him. He's my customer or she is my customer. In my mind, they're not mutually exclusive. It's that we're all people and we're all human beings. We all have need for that connection. I mean, how many times have we all gone into a restaurant and you are waiting on service and then that server comes to you and you can tell, even before they're even at your table, they are so far behind, they're underwater. And at that moment, you extend that grace to them. Even though you're their customer, in my mind, they're not a mutually exclusive thing. To me, that's the answer.
Good point.
Paul and Chris, you both talked about, right? The customer of leaders are staff.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Chris, what are your thoughts about that before we move on to we've got some great questions and comments, and I invite them to keep coming. Chris?
Yeah, just real quick, John, I think we have a tendency to sacrifice our team members' mental health and well-being for good customer service. And I think that in our industry, especially in maintenance, we want to do everything we can because the customer is always right, and the customer, is paying us, rent. But we have to be cognizant of the sacrifices of the good customer service that we're providing on our mental health team, on the mental health of our teams. The decisions and policies that we make, we got to make sure that, do they really need to come out at 3 o'clock in the morning for a smoke detector battery that's beeping on an on-call? That is not good for our mental health. Is that a true emergency? Some places it is. Paul and I have gotten into many an argument about this exact topic, so we won't do it in this forum. But those are things to think about. Is good customer service, having some long-term effects on your team?
Well, and let's face it, whether it's you or your customer, whoever that customer may be, I like to always say we all have mental health, right?
Mhm.
We're somewhere on that spectrum. We're either on the good side, we're on the bad side, or we're all somewhere in between. And here's what amazes me is if we have high blood pressure, which not all of us do, we'll go to the doctor, right? Or high cholesterol, or God forbid you have cancer or whatever. We don't all have that. Every single person that walks on this planet, including you and your customer, falls somewhere on that mental health spectrum, right? And I think we have to appreciate that. I've got a comment here. I got a couple more questions. Lisa, if I felt any anxiety before your session, I am at so much more peace. Thank you for your soothing spirit. I'll agree to that. You just have when I look for a mental health provider, and I'm a mental health patient, not afraid to say that, I look for someone that's soothing and understanding, and you certainly have that about you. Will we receive this slide in PDF? I know there was some conversation about that before we got started today. James, I'm going to throw this one to you. Are they going to be able to get this in PDF?
That's Lisa has graciously shared the slides in PDF, but so you can certainly email me, but there's your email address right there for expedience sake. So Monica, I would suggest sending Liza an email while you've got it on the tip of your mind.
Yeah, go ahead and jot that down. And Lisa, we appreciate you making that email address public so people can get in touch with you.
Here to help.
Another question. I love the questions, by the way. We're here for you as long as you need us to be. How to communicate effectively with residents that are irate. The breathing techniques may not work when person to person. I'm going to throw that one to Lisa because I know that's something Chris, Paul, and I all have experienced on site. So I'm going to go right to the professional on how do we deal with it.
Yeah. So breathe for yourself first, because remember, if you can't stay calm, it's okay. If you're just not the right one to respond to that irate customer, right, or resident, and to say, you know what, I'm not able to help you. Let me get someone else who can. So that warm handoff. The calmer we can stay, actually, we can help bring someone calm with us. So, make sure that you're in that space first. And then there are a lot of different things that people can do. Like I said, rocking chairs, music or rhythm, the breathing can help. It's knowing that person and finding ways in which, before we get there, can we just take a breath? I want to help you. I want to, be there for you. But we both need to calm down, or I need to be calm so I can think through this. I hear you, I'm here, and we're going to get through to the end. Can just be, I'm going to be with you through this. And let's, kind of bring the temperature down a little.
And if I could add to that.
Engage. Well, it's if you don't engage, right?
Yeah.
If I'm escalated and I'm upset and you match me, oh, we're going. Yeah. Right. But if you can stay calm, that can help as well. finding different ways to do that. Smells, scent, sound, lavender. We have a hospital that actually has a code lavender, and they show up with lavender tea and, nice scents and smells, because there are different ways that we all calm down.
And one thing I have found that's always worked for me when I deal with an irate resident is instead of sitting at a desk across from them, I go somewhere where we can sit together. We're both at the same level. We're not standing, because I have found when we both stand, we're posturing just for
Right.
both of us to become more irritable with each other. But when you sit down, that's a relaxing motion within itself. But then being at that person's level with them, it's a more understanding approach. I think now listen, those of you that are still with us, don't go anywhere, because we've got some great information about what's coming up this week. So as I make these comments, don't think, oh, they're through, so I'm going to click off. You're going to miss some great information if you do that. James, do you see that I have missed?
Just one. Monique
Yeah.
asked a question. What happens if there is no one else to quote unquote pass on to?
So I think what I've done in
go ahead, Chris.
I think what I've done in my experience is acknowledge that fact, is acknowledge that, you know what, neither one of us is prepared to have this conversation. Why don't we cool our jets? And you know what, I will set aside a half hour, and put it on the calendar. And a lot of times in my experience of the resident in my face, yelling and screaming, like John said, it's happened to, all of us, is that person will come back with a completely different attitude, because they have, I'm going to go back to what Lisa said. They go from that terror level where they're in your face, they're not thinking, and they can go all the way back to calm by the time that you're meeting again.
And to add on to that, mine is very similar to that. If you're the only one there, whatever your response is, and this was the challenging moment for me on a property as the only maintenance supervisor around dealing with that crisis, is that it's important to be real. And the challenge part of that is, if your real is anger, terror, frustration, yelling, screaming, then it does go back to that, who's the real problem? The resident who's yelling and screaming at me? Or is the problem or challenge in this situation who's looking back at me in the mirror when I go take a break in the bathroom? So if my response is going to be real, and as Chris says there, let's schedule this for later. How about we come back in 2 hours? I'll shut the office. We'll do it. That way, not only are we expressing the value to our irate resident, we're taking action. We're making a schedule. We're proving, not just saying, we're proving that what they're saying is important. And we want to make sure that we can respond appropriately to whatever it is that they're trying to say, and maybe even go beyond the yelling and screaming to the underlying cause or the underlying cure.
Yeah, and I would just say, that last slide that I showed, remember that everyone's doing the best they can to survive. Yeah. And what you're seeing is them reacting or responding to something else. If they're that upset about a light bulb not being changed, right? There's something else going on with them. That empathy of, assume positive intent, recognize everyone's doing the best they can with what they have, that we're frequently seeing someone with a misplaced coping mechanism, ourselves included, right? And that since we are part of the problem, we can be part of that solution. So just being present and genuine. And I think sometimes when we can just give people the benefit of the doubt, they might be yelling and screaming at me, but that's the best they can do right now. And gosh, would I want to be in the place where the best I could do would be yelling and screaming? No, I can't even imagine what kind of pain they're in right now. Let me connect on that level with them about, wow, you sound really upset. Like there's a lot going on for you. Let's just take a pause. Can really, get us to such a much better human place, because we all are doing the best we can.
So I'm getting ready to throw things over to for James, but before I do, and he's going to tell you about the week ahead, I do want to mention our 2 now surveys that we've completed. NAA, in partnership with Swift Money, has completed 2 surveys. And the first survey we did last year, James, I believe we had 75% of the respondents were on-site employees, if I'm not mistaken. So we're tallying the scores and the results and what have you, the ratings from this last survey that just closed last week. And we will have 2 apartmentalized sessions for you in San Diego that discusses that. And the National Council is going to be part of both of those apartmentalized sessions. So we're super excited about that. So James, I know you're going to tell us more about what's coming up this week. So I'm going to turn things over to you.
You bet. Well, again, thank you, John, for the terrific moderation. Thank you, Paul and Chris, for great insights. Thank you, Lisa. Terrific presentation. Thank you all for. We've got some brand new web pages that we've created. We've accumulated all of our mental health resources into a whole new section here. It includes what John described. We've got a whole section on our groundbreaking mental and emotional health survey, which just wrapped up with really record-breaking results, just 56% higher in terms of respondents than we had all last year. So things are, really well regarded, well participated survey. We've also got the rest of our Mental Health Awareness Week. We're off to a fantastic start here, and we finish up. We continue tomorrow with trauma. On Wednesday with mitigating employee burnout. And then finally, John, you and Pete Regulis are going to take us home with coping strategies for on-site staff. That's Thursday. So if you haven't already, make sure to register for all 3 remaining webinars. And of course, if you've enjoyed what you've heard today, and we recognize too, Paul, you and Chris mentioned this, that on-site staff are not always free during NAA's typical time frame. Well, the good news, starting next week, most likely, we'll post this and all 4 mental health webinars on our YouTube channel. You can watch it and at your leisure when you've got downtime on the job or off the job, and share the links as well with your colleagues. So again, I wish to thank everybody here for participating. Great questions, great moderation, great presentations. And thank you to our audience for listening in. We value your membership and we appreciate your attendance always. So have a great afternoon.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.